I'm the Scale Model Geek, and I'm a huge fan of Ray Harryhausen, who is an absolute legend in the field of stop-motion animation. And when Loot released their brand new pack and it featured dinosaurs, and specifically this T-Rex, I knew exactly what I wanted to build. As usual with Loot, the standard was absolutely fantastic. The sculpture is just magnificent with all the detail. Now they come pre-supported and hollowed out, and the only problem I had was this tail. For some reason they put these little vent holes in some really strange areas. So I grabbed the non-hollowed version and just reprinted it. That tail would have caused me a few headaches, having to sand it down, fill in the holes and get the texture right. But with Loot, the joints are really tight. So a bit of subglue, and once I put all the whole 4 pieces together, the joints are really tight, so it didn't take much filling. I found this really cool bottle with a really long and precise nozzle on it, and I just filled it up with a bit of UV resin, and once I got into the little joints there, I just hardened it with this UV torch. These bottles were really cheap from a craft shop. They were about $6 for 3 bottles. Once I hardened the joints with the UV torch, I did put it into the UV curing machine for about 3 minutes, just to be safe. Once that was completed, a quick coat of black primer. I made sure it was a nice, even and solid coverage of the T-Rex. And here's a little cowboy. Now I created this cowboy from scratch in a piece of software called Titancraft. Now this is an online piece of software. It's absolutely wonderful. It is a bit limiting. It's mainly designed for fantasy figures and has a lot of beasts, but I was able to work it out, so I created a couple of our cowboys. Now I just played around with the figures until I got the dynamic poses I was after. Now I did look online everywhere, hoping to find something that would suit, and I couldn't, so I ended up going to Titancraft for this. Not only can you pose the cowboy, you can also pose the horse. There are 6 standard poses for the horse. You can then do your alterations. As you can see, you can get a whole host of different heads and body shapes and beards, hats, all that type of thing. But sadly, it is a bit limiting for the real world, because like I said earlier, this is designed for the fantasy figure world. So if you want to create something like a cowboy, you do have to get a bit creative and kind of work around it. One of the things I love about Titancraft is once you've finished designing your figure, you can then download it as an STL file and print it out in your 3D printer. But that's not the great bit. The great bit is you can then go back into the software, repose your figure and download it again without any extra charge. How good is that? It's only like $3 a figure, so you end up a whole cavalry if you wish for $3. Now once I had the 3D file downloaded, I then imported it into this 3D software called Blender, which is available free online. It's a great piece of software. So I wanted to add a bit more detail to the cowboy. I jumped onto a website called Thingiverse and started looking for a whole bunch of accessories, like his gun and holster on the side there. I also found myself a length of rope for his lasso, and just cut and pasted and flipped it around. Also found a coil rope, did 3 copies of that, again twisted around and resized it to suit. Now I also did find some stirrers, but at this point I actually forgot to add it to the video, so they are there. You'll see them a little bit later. I then exported that as an STL file to import into my 3D printing software. Now the T-Rex is 32mm, so that's roughly about 1/86 scale. I had no idea what the cowboy sizes were, so I figured if I import them into the Chitterbox, I can then resize it. The problem was, they came out huge. In Titancraft, it doesn't tell you how big the figure is. So, as you can see, it's ginormous, so I had to do some math. And I suck at maths. So, bear with me as I do some rough guesstimates here. Now, the original figure was about 216mm in height. Average dude is 5'9", which is about 176 centimeters. Average horse is about 15 hands, and that's about 152 centimeters in height. Now when an average person sits down, they're about half the height. Like I said, these are rough figures, so please don't go into the comments busting my balls regarding the figures. That means the cowboy will be 88 centimeters plus the height of the horse, which is about 152 centimeters, brings you to a total of 240 centimeters. Which means the total height of the horse and the cowboy in 1/86 scale will make him 43 millimeters, which means I need to shrink him down by 19.88%. After working out those calculations, I went and had a sleep for 3 hours. But all that was worth it, because everything is in scale now. And of course I had to do that with the other cowboy as well, because I had 2 of those dudes. The T-Rex was already printed because it was pre-supported. I just needed to work out all the supports for the 2 cowboys and then print the dudes out. And that was it. Now, because I'm not super duper with Blender, I did need to add a few more details once I had printed it. Now, I didn't know how to do the reins and the straps for the stirrups, so I'm using some of this tin foil. Now, this comes from the top of a butter container. Now, I've had this little piece for years. I think they're plastic now. They're really thin tin, so I just cut out the width of the strips that I need, straighten it out, and it's got this great texture to it as well. And using a bit of super glue, I just had a fiddly time putting everything into place. I don't know anything about horses or bridles or reins or that type of thing, so I jumped online and did a bit of research, downloaded a whole bunch of images to figure out where everything goes. And I think I got it fairly accurate, as a novice can. This tin foil is really thin and flexible, and it is really strong, so it made life a little bit easier as I was putting everything together, because I wasn't worried about it breaking. Yeah, I was pretty happy with the final result. Came out good. And of course I had to do the same thing on the other cowboy. Now it's time to paint the figures. I'm starting off with a base coat of some black primer, and then I'm going to use some acrylic ink. This is Liquitex, and it's white, and I'll be spraying it from one direction to create some zenithal lighting. And this creates my highlights and my shadows. This pre-shading technique saves so much time when it comes to painting figures. It's time to do all the colours, and for the horse I'm using some of this dark flesh tone. Give it a bit of an airbrush, nice even coat, but it's a light coat so I don't lose any of that shadowing. I'll be adding some of this glaze medium as well as some white to the dark flesh tone, and here I'm painting up the highlights. One horse will get some white on the lower portions of the legs, and the other horse will get black. Even though they're both brown horses, they'll have some slight variations. Now here I'm painting the saddle with some tan colour. I've already painted the shirts. For the clothes I'm just picking some colours, making them up as I go. One horse got black straps and the other one got brown ones. Again, just to break them up a bit. And with the cowboys done, it's on to the T-Rex. With some light grey, and I'm just going to add some variation to the overall colour. Early in the video, as you saw, I painted him the black primer. And now I'm just hitting the top ends, sort of like a zenithal, but a lot more subtle with this light grey. I did add a bit of white to the pot, just to create some more highlights. This sand colour I'll be using for the underside of T-Rex. And I'm just doing this in a mottling type pattern, just to give it a bit of variation. Then the same thing with some of this flat yellow, and I'll do the whole of T-Rex with this. I'm just slowly building up the colours with the airbrush. They're light thin coats. And back onto this dark flesh, and I'm going to do the same thing with a bit of mottling, but I'm concentrating more on the top section of the dinosaur. I'm using some of this dark sea grey, mainly for the top areas of T-Rex. You know, I just might call him Rex from now on, a little bit easier, plus we're buddies. Some of this red terracotta to create a mottled effect. And this is a very light coat, just to kind of blend all the other colours together. And this is the final result from all those shades of colours we've used. It's looking really good, I'm really happy with that. I like the tones. But we're not quite finished. We still need to bring out some more detail in his skin. This is a dry brushing paint from Ammo and colours Earth, and we'll be dry brushing some of that detail so it really pops. And this also unifies all the colours together a lot more. Look at that detail, it's so nice. The sculpting is great from Loot. Now for the inside of his mouth, I'm using some of this beige red. Psst, here's a little secret. This is actually take 2. First time around I used the clear red and it came up awful. It was disgusting. I used a bit of clear blue for his tongue. Yeah, I didn't want to waste your time, so with the power of editing we just skipped through that. And look how good it looks now. For the eyes and the teeth I used some of this pale sand. Then onto this red brown, and I'm using this as a mottled effect on the flesh tones of the inside of the mouth. And I thinned it down with some of this glazed medium. And what I did, I just put little dots everywhere, and as that dried, they became a lot more translucent. And look, it gave me that real meaty effect. I was really happy with that effect, it came up good. And to add a bit of a gnarly finish to the teeth, I'm using some of this sepia wash. And just making sure it's right at the bottom of the teeth, or the top, you know, at the gum section. Then I went back to the off-white and dry brushed the very tips of the teeth. A bit later on I will go in with some clear semi-gloss and do the inside of his mouth. And there he is, Rex is done. Almost. Now with him done, it's onto the base, and I'm just using an old base that I had laying around from a previous build, which I didn't like and kind of end up scrapping. Here I'm just removing all the rocky areas so I get a fairly flat surface, because I want a sort of like a, you know, small field, deserty type thing. And the quickest way I could think of removing all those glued foliage areas was to simply just burn it off. To give the base a new surface, I'm just using some of this plaster of Paris, available here in Australia at Bunnings, 3 kilos, only cost 14 bucks, cheap. I'm just adding a bit of colour to this, and just some acrylic brown paint there. And using the spatula, it was a bit thick, maybe too thick. Probably could have added a bit more water, give it more of a creamier finish. And to get rid of the streaks from the spatula, just a damp brush. Sprinkling a bit of kitty litter as well as some railway ballast. And again pushing it with a damp brush. This was looks like when it's all dry. This dark flesh tone colour seems to be getting a bit of use in this diorama. I'll be using a number of different colours as I build up the colour tones of the terrain. Some browns, some greens. Talking about greens, here's some olive. Some medium olive. Honestly, I'm just making this up as I go along. I'm just using colours that I think might suit the terrain. So I end up using some of this olive drab as well. Now to cover all the paintwork that I just did, I'm just using some of this green. Now I think it's about 3mm static grass. I think I probably, in hindsight, got a bit carried away with the grass. There might be too much grass. I'm just using some of this foam that's been shredded up. And these are my little bushes, because we are working in 1/86 scale. So, you know, I can use these clumps of foam to make it look like little hedgy things. And back onto this medium olive again, and I'm trying to paint everything to unify all the different greens. Quite frankly, the static grass green is pretty awful. Everything still feels a bit too green for me, so I'm using some of this barbarian flesh and toning it all down a bit. Then some of this medium green to dry brush everything. Again, that helps to unify. It's a bit of a trial and error situation, but it's starting to come together. I'm really liking the tones now. Now off camera, drilled a couple of holes there and put in some 1.5mm wires. And I had to pre-drill some holes through the plaster there because that was really rock solid. And now for the bit that I've been dreading for the whole build. I need to make some lassos, and I wasn't sure how to do it originally. I was going to use some wire, but then I came up with this idea. My filament 3D printer, just before it starts printing the actual object, creates this line. And it's this outline of a really fine beading of filament. It's about 1.25 mm wide. And it's really flexible, it's quite strong. And what I did to create this was I made a big box in Blender, stuck it into my 3D printing software, and then just before I actually started printing the object, I just turned it off. And I now have these really thin and flexible strips of plastic. Pretty awesome idea, I thought. Now I'm creating a little hoop for the lasso, and a bit of super glue, and just holding it together, and it creates, like I said, that little hoop. Give it a base coat of the tan. I wasted a bit of paint trying to hit that little piece of fine filament there, but I got there in the end. Now to glue down Rex, I'm using some of this Aerodite 5mm epoxy adhesive. Just a bit of a dollop on each foot. I want to create some dripping saliva in his mouth, so I'm using some of this Tarzan grip. This stuff is really stringy, so I start at one end and just drag it across to the other end. And here we go, here comes my lasso. How easy is that? Goes straight on, like a real lasso. Don't ask me how they did this in real life, how they got the lasso over his big head, but they did. This idea works so well that the lasso end, I didn't even have to glue it into place. It sat there perfectly. And I'm just snipping this off at where the cowboy is going to be. Quick spot of glue, and just held them into place until that dried. It did take a couple of drops of glue in the end to make sure it was nice and solid in there. And once that was completely dry, a couple of drops of super glue on the horse's hoofs, and I glued them into place. And there they are. I got to, yeah, they came up pretty good. I got to say so myself. Really happy with the lassos. Quite proud of that. And with the figures all glued into place, it's time to add the final touches to the terrain. Some of these little bushes that I bought off AliExpress, all the way from China. Cheap as chips they are. Let me know in the comments what you think of this build. Any suggestions? Let me know. I really enjoyed doing this build, especially being inspired by somebody like Ray Harryhausen. He was such an inspiration for so many stop motion animators. Well, he inspired me to make this. I hope you enjoyed the build, and thanks for sticking around to the end, and it's time for the hero images.